In 1928, when I was 14, I got a job in the textile mill doing piecework, and this is the story of how I made my way without doing very many pieces. The mill was a grim and noisy place. It was surrounded by a high fence, and if you were late to work, the man guarding the gate would shove it in your face and say, "No work for you today." He seemed to take a kind of cheerless pleasure in doing so. I was a scrawny kid with a catastrophic limp from the polio I was born with. Anyone could see me coming from a long ways off because of the terrible lurching way that I walked. My first day, I was sent to a room with a huge work table where a dozen or so women sat sewing furiously. They never looked up. The man who brought me said, "This here's Ada. Show her what to do." I looked around the table, but nobody seemed inclined to stop and show me. I realized later that this would have interfered with the desperate attempt to get as many pieces done as possible, because that's how you got paid. Finally, a large, colorless woman with pale, watery blue eyes said in a heavy Pennsylvania Dutch accent, "Here, do it like this. And you've got to watch that man count your pieces at the end of the day. He'll cheat you as sure as you're sitting here." Then the women took up their gossiping again. "Did you see Mr. Brunner coming home drunk last night? Poor Elsa and her expecting again. He'll lose his job as sure as heck." Now, I love to talk almost better than anything. So I was waiting for my chance, but I was lowest in the pecking order, so no one paid me any mind. I might have been invisible. A girl my age should have been out on the floor with the machines, but I couldn't, so there I was. At some point in the late afternoon, a shaft of light shone from a high casement window and made its way across the surface of the work table. It so happened that there was a lull in the constant chatter because of something Hilda said about Anna's mother-in-law, I think. So I piped up with, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun." "That's Shakespeare," I said. I said with pride while everyone stared as though seeing me for the first time. And so it began, for I had been to school all the way through the 8th grade and knew my Shakespeare by heart. While the needles flew, I began the tragic tale of Romeo and Juliet. Mrs. Schmidt, my 5th grade teacher, would have been horrified at my overly dramatic rendition, her being such a strict Lutheran and all. But Miss Alcott with the dreamy eyes in 6th grade would have been proud. I got to, "Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy Palmer's kiss." When the whistle blew. As one, the women looked up from their sewing, their eyes shining with the romance of it all. As I drank in their admiration, I knew suddenly how Sarah Bernhardt and all the great ladies of the theater must have felt. Suddenly, a pall came over the lot of them. I followed their gaze to the pitiful little pile that was my piecework. If you didn't make a certain number of pieces in a day, you got fired. No one spoke, but I knew what they were thinking. Now they would never find out what happened to Juliet and her Romeo. Hilda looked so stricken I thought she might cry, and I hadn't even got to the really good part yet. There was a terrible stillness around that table. Suddenly, Hilda reached in her piece bag, pulled some out, smacked him down, and pushed him over to my pile. She looked all around the table with challenge in her eyes, and every one of them put some of their pieces in too. The man who counted the pieces looked surprised when he saw my pile, but just shrugged and said, "Come back tomorrow." And Hilda smiled a smile I will never forget. Every day, as long as I worked there, I regaled the ladies with all the glories of my 8th grade education, the poems, the plays, and the songs, and they paid me with their precious pieces. And that man at the gate would wait for me and let me in even if I was late. It wasn't exactly the way it was supposed to be, but there it was. Good night, Mom, and thanks for the story.